Good morning, everyone. I'm delighted to uh, give this brief initial remarks, which will be followed by a detailed lecture by my colleague, Mr. Vishnu Das Gupta. I first thank Dr. Brahma Reddy to invite both of us to give this talk. Very happy to address this audience with all of you here. Um, since the focus of our discussion will be on the trade policy in India, I wanted to briefly talk about what have been the broad trends in terms of trade in the past few years. When I say trade, I mean trade policy, not just the trends in trade data or something. So, as some of you or many of you may know, the Western countries have been traditionally propagating or developing arguments for and theories for more liberalized trade, free trade across the world, particularly in terms of reducing barriers to export and import. And of course, there are other kinds of checks and balances they have in order to protect the domestic sector, domestic industry. So some of the examples could be, a wide range of subsidies in terms of production, in terms of research and development, infrastructure, and so on. And now, if you look at the developing countries, they have been traditionally less open when it comes to trade, and have also had relatively fewer resources to be deployed for subsidies. So that has been the traditional point of view. Like the West has been more open in terms of trade. The traditional, the standard barriers of trade have been lower in the Western countries, and they have been higher in the developing countries. So I'm not only talking about Western countries, but I'm talking about developed countries and developing countries. And we can call them North and South. So the North, however, has become more protectionist in the recent past. It all started with the broad discontentment among the people in the Western countries, in the North, for the trade policy in general, free trade policy in general, because the people, the industries and the consumers and the people, the employees and so on, who lost their livelihoods or got their livelihoods affected because of trade, they were sizable in number, although the people who benefited from trade were many more, both in terms of number and in terms of magnitude of gains. Of course, there is a lot of research done on it, which says that the gains from trade have been predominantly high, both in terms of theoretical studies and empirical studies. But however, it's also an emotional issue, also a social issue. So when people see a lot of foreign goods coming in and a lot of domestic goods reduced, and lots of kind of jobs that are available before that are not existing today, but there are many more job opportunities. There is a lot of variety in the market, and so on. So there are both pros and cons that we see, but somehow when the losses from trade are not taken sufficient care of, then that leads to some kind of discontentment, and that leads to political change. So the political changes in countries like UK and US, for example, led to greater level of protectionism. So for the first time after several decades, the tariffs became higher in some of these countries, and other countries also retaliated. So I don't want to get into the details. Of course, we can talk for a long time about those things. But here, my purpose is just to tell you that the developed countries became more protectionist for various reasons. Okay, so now when it comes to the developing countries, particularly countries like China, they have become more and more open because they have been able to succeed in exporting, trade, and so on. So that also such export optimism also started happening in some of the Southeast Asian countries, and all these countries have become much more open now. Now India, when it comes to India, it has been traditionally on the protectionist camp, and after the 1991 reforms, we have become more and more liberalized. We have opened up, we have reduced our tariffs, we have reduced our non-tariff barriers, and so on. And we have also gained a lot. We have also lost some of the inefficient industries, companies, and so on that were shut down because of the import competition. And there also have been instances of dumping. Right? Dumping happens because of the imports becoming artificially cheaper than the domestic, and so on. So all these things happen. So now what happened is that the domination of China got slightly reduced because of this protectionism, and also particularly during COVID and so on, China's overall reputation globally got affected, and that led to movement of trade and investment away from China and towards other countries, and one of those many countries is India, and we have definitely benefited a little bit because of that diversion. So that this and several other policies of the government led to India's stellar export performance last year. India has done really well, has been the record high in the recent past. Record high ever, and over $400 billion of merchandise exports. So that led to India becoming more and more optimistic when it comes to trade, and in the past we have not signed many free trade agreements. We have signed a bunch of them, but not many of them. None of them can be called plurilateral with many countries involved. However, we have continued to focus on rules-based, transparent, global trading system where everyone knows what is happening, every country knows what is happening, and we have a transparent dialogue. So that is the preferred route for us. Ever since GATT and WTO negotiations were happening, so India has always batted for multilateral trade negotiations. So now, in the recent past, the multilateralism has got a big blow. So that led to all the countries resorting to this plurilateral trade agreements and so on, where countries form a group and then have negotiations within the group. So India has been part of one of them, which is Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which RCEP, which we all know that we have withdrawn from a couple of years ago. And after that, our policymakers also felt like we have to do something for trade. We cannot stay with high trade barriers, so we have to start reducing our barriers, and that is when our exports also perform well. So when all these things happen, we started signing free trade agreements, and negotiating free trade agreements, and then we have been also negotiating and completing and signing trade agreements on a very quick kind of basis. So we got the UAE FTA signed recently, and also Australia free trade agreement signed recently. Several other agreements are in process. So now the free trade agreements are one tool to increase exports, because you get access to the markets in the other countries, and you also allow cheaper imported inputs, which can add to the competitiveness for exports. You cannot export without importing. You have to import something or the other if you can boost exports, because you don't produce everything here. We should also not produce everything here. We should only produce things for which we can effectively, efficiently produce. So that's the broad story. And of course, you have many other schemes. You have production linked incentives, which is leading to increased exports in sectors which we have been lagging behind for many years. We are developing capacity and so on. We also are working hard to reduce the transaction costs, the logistics costs, and so on. So all these things are working on, and we have been working on, and the Honorable Prime Minister has set a target of doubling the exports in the near future, the next 5 years or so. So that's something we are also working on. We want to double the exports. We have had a stagnant export share, global export share of around 1.6 to 1.8% for several years. Now we are slowly beginning to come out of it. So now we'll discuss more along these lines. We'll show a lot of trends, a lot of policy discussions, and maybe even some research that we did. I would now welcome my colleague Mr. Vishnu Das Gupta to take over. Thank you very much once again.